560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. State Senator Linda Holmes, out of Will County. Thank you, Will County. She has proposed making Illinois, I think it would be the 11th state to legalize assisted suicide, getting the medical profession in the business of killing people on purpose.
Yeah, just if they don't feel good, if they're depressed. Oh, I want to die. Okay, sure. Just
Well,
tell us the date and time.
Well, that's what's happening in some other countries. That's not, of course, what's contained in the legislation in Illinois, because you don't start at the bottom of the slippery slope. You start at the top. You make it as sanitized as possible and hope people don't ask the questions about, could this set precedents? Does this leave open doors where we could slide down into a place where we are indulging people's mental afflictions and ending their lives under that guise or on that basis? Well, Linda Holmes, the state senator, said she decided to sponsor this legislation because of the suffering her parents went through as they battled cancer. And I understand that. It's terrible. Nobody wants to see their parents suffer. Nobody wants to see themselves suffer in particular. And there's clearly people are thinking when they see somebody in a terribly difficult state, gosh, I hope that never happens to me. If that happens to me, I would want it ended. I want somebody to pull the plug. All the conversations that people have had. But is that fear a good basis to make wide-sweeping public policy? I mean, we're seeing it right now in Chicago over the last year with Steve McMichael's battle, with ALS. Right. Of course, it's terrible. You don't wish that on anybody. And people, nobody would want that to happen to them or loved or really anybody else. And so you see that kind of suffering, the atrophying of the body, and the mind is still there. For example, you say, gosh, I would never want to be in that state. I'd want somebody to end it, or I'd want to be able to end it, or I'd want to be able to end it on behalf of a loved one in that case. And so it's a difficult decision to wrestle with and a difficult debate to have, because it sounds compassionate. Well, to have that reaction.
You should put it in your will, what you want to have happen.
Fair enough. But in terms of the larger policy debate, it sounds compassionate. But is it really? Is that the compassionate way to contemplate the matter? For more on the answer to that question, please be joined by Wesley Smith, Senior Fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism. Wesley, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, good morning, Chicago.
So what do you say to Senator Holmes, the sponsor of the assisted suicide legislation here, Death with Dignity, of course, that, it's the terrible suffering my parents went through as they battled cancer to the end, and that's what inspired me to sponsor this legislation, and looking at the experience of other states, particularly on the West Coast, the time has come.
Well, you always hear this kind of story when they want to push it, and they push it through fear-mongering. But if you take a look at the statistics of people who commit assisted suicide or who are euthanized, and this is pretty clear across the countries, it's not about pain and suffering. It's about fear, existential fear of losing dignity, fear of being a burden. That's a really big thing. And so you find that also that, the promise is always, well, we'll have strict guidelines to protect against abuse. Then as soon as the law becomes enacted, the supposed guidelines are redefined as obstacles, and you begin to see that kind of liberalizing expansion of the law. Assisted suicide is not about terminal illness. It's about killing as an answer to suffering. And once you decide that killing is an answer to suffering, the types of suffering that can eventually qualify for killing are almost endless. And that's why you see in places very close to Chicago, like in Canada, where you have people with disabilities being euthanized. You have people who can't get good access to medical care being euthanized. In fact, that's a big issue here. We're told that the very doctors who are unable to properly care for people because of resource issues or access issues should also be trusted to help kill people. It makes no sense.
Well, it just seems so barbaric. And all of this started in Europe. They've been doing this for a long time.
Well, the Netherlands has been doing it for many years, for decades, literally. They formally legalized it in '03. And in the Netherlands, you've seen the trajectory. They've gone from killing the terminally ill to the chronically ill to the elderly who are, quote, tired of life, to people with disabilities, to the mentally ill. People become, once you legalize assisted suicide, once you're a killable caste, C-A-S-T-E, people become objectified. So you see organ harvesting conjoined with euthanasia in places like Netherlands, Belgium, and in Canada. In Canada, in fact, it's so bad that in Ontario, if you qualify for euthanasia, the doctor calls the Organ Donation Society, and then they call you and say, can we have your liver? I mean, that's how bad it's become. And so once you open this door, it expands continually. Almost every state in this country, which is much more constrained than, say, Canada, because the people have not adapted it or adopted it widely like they have in Canada. But California has expanded the law. Oregon has expanded the law. Oregon allows non-residents, and so does Vermont, to have assisted suicide. What is the Oregon state interest in allowing somebody from Utah to come and have assisted suicide? There isn't any, because it's an ideological agenda. And eventually it becomes about money in the healthcare system.
Well, I mean, one way to deal with that organ harvesting situation is to do what I do, which is to live a life such that all your organs are unusable by anyone else.
Nobody wants your liver.
So, yeah.
But that would open you to medical experimentation. We got to figure all this out.
We can clean
for
that
sure.
up.
For sure. No, I'm sort of tired of life too, but I'm going to marshal on. I feel like I'm charged to. So in Canada, you said this eventually goes to money too. I get that, and older people, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to lose my dignity. Before we get to the money thing, well, what about that? If somebody who's, whatever, in their 90s and we're running out of money, I don't want to rely on the kids and grandkids. I don't want to be a burden on the kids and grandkids. I'm done with life. I don't want to live anymore. I can't really get around it. All of the things that you hear and say, okay, I'm ready. So, and you say what to the person in that situation or to the family of the person in that situation?
Well, in that situation, as we would with anybody who's suicidal, the answer is suicide prevention. I mean, we used to understand that when, and elderly people do get depressed, there are actually specialists who can help with that, who can help elderly people overcome that depression. Often it's because of loneliness and isolation. The answer to loneliness and isolation is to help people not be lonely and isolated. It isn't to give them poison pills to kill themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that seems pretty straightforward.
In fact, if I approached you for an assist, if I said, "Look, Dan, I'm suicidal," you'd say, "Oh, come on, let's get the suicide prevention in. Let's make sure you don't jump off the bridge." And then I say, "But I have cancer," and you say, "Oh, well, that's different. Here, let me hold your coat." I mean, it really is an isolating and abandoning ethic that says to some people, "Yes, your lives aren't worth living," but other people, well, we'll try to protect you from suicide.
So what do you say? Look, Wesley, at the end of the day, I hear what you're saying, and yes, I don't want people to kill themselves, but if they've made the decision, it's their body, their choice, it's their personal autonomy, I respect your decision, so on and so forth.
Well, this is, nobody's death is isolated. This affects how society views people. This affects how society views the importance of life. Suicide is people, all of us, I could be dead in 5 minutes if I wanted to be from here, but we're not talking about suicide. We're talking about a joint enterprise to make someone dead, assisted suicide, enabling doctors to help kill people. Well, why should doctors be able to help kill people? They're not, all they're doing is giving people an overdose of drugs. It really is an issue that people embraced because of stories like this legislator. But I have stories, too, that show how very awful this agenda is. So we have to not only run on emotion and on stories, but what will this cause, where will this lead, and what will happen? Again, in Canada, there have been at least 2 people that I'm aware of, and this was reported by the Canadian media, who didn't want euthanasia. They wanted treatment for their cancer, but it took 9 months to get to an oncologist. And so instead they chose to be euthanized. Mm-hmm. That is the kind of thing that will happen if we continue with this, because the inertia, if you will be towards getting sick and expensive and hard to care for people out of the way.
Well, yeah, particularly if the Western countries continue to get poorer by their own hands and their own profligate spending policies, then we got to cut somewhere. And, Medicare, particularly end-of-life care, is real expensive.
In fact, a Belgian health executive recently let it out of the bag, and he said, well, we really have to do this because these old people are a real drag on our society. So,
well, during Obamacare, it wasn't that long ago, Zeke Emanuel famously said, I want to be gone after 75, and,
now
you should follow me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what about...
It really changes people's attitudes towards each other, and it's very poisonous in that regard.
Everybody looking at each other. Is it time to go yet, Granny? But what about teenagers and young adults who want to kill themselves? Because there's a young lady, she's 28 years old, scheduled to die in May. And she was talking about it on Facebook, and she seems very normal to me, but she said she's suffering from debilitating depression. Do you think that, the 10 states that have it here, that's going to be acceptable someday?
Someday, yeah, because the logic is inescapable. The issue is suffering. The issue isn't whether you're dying. And mental illness can cause far more suffering than cancer, and for a far longer period of time. So once we say suffering, killing is an answer to suffering, there's no moral principle that would stop it at any particular point. In fact, in Germany now, the highest court in Germany has said there's a fundamental right to commit suicide. There's a fundamental, for any reason, not having to do with health, but just for whatever reason you want, and nobody can gainsay it. There's a fundamental right to be assisted in suicide, and there's a fundamental right to assist suicide. It's called death on demand, and that's the final destination of the euthanasia movement.
Just in terms of how slippery this slope is, tell us the story of the amputations in Quebec.
Well, this has to do with the transgender issue, and with an affliction called BIID, body identity integrity disorder. It's what comes after transgender. There's a cadre of patients who have a very anguishing condition where they believe they obsess that, let's say, their left arm shouldn't be there. They identify as a quadriplegic. They identify as somebody who can't see. And this has been known for a period of time. Not a lot of people have it, but people do have it. Well, the answer is beginning to be said, as with the transgender social craze, that, instead of trying to help people keep their arms, let's cut them off for them. And in Quebec, there was this fellow with BIID, and he believed that 2 of his fingers did not belong on his hand. And the treatment, quote unquote, was to cut them off, cut off healthy fingers. There's been another case of a woman who obsessed on being blind, and her psychologist poured caustic substances in her eyes. So if everything is subjective, if everything becomes about feelings, and we have to accede to feelings even beyond what should be a professional duty to do no harm, then there's no moral principle that would stop it anywhere. And so it's very interesting that the people with this condition are beginning to call themselves transable. Get it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
right.
Because I think it could get any worse.
Well, because they'll be celebrated. Yeah, because they'll be celebrated. Part of the trans community. They'll be included.
Exactly, and this fellow who had his fingers cut off, the media did a big celebration of it because, it's whatever people want. Well, sometimes what people want is very destructive to themselves and to the culture generally.
Yeah, and for those people listening, and you think that you've had all the conversations that we've talked about, and you've thought about these things. You say, well, it's a compassionate thing. Oh, the suffering is so bad, just in these isolated cases. And I would never support having a doctor cut off somebody's fingers because they thought their fingers didn't belong. That's where we draw the line. You don't get it. Once you erase lines, you don't get to redraw them. Once you give in to the sentimentalism, you don't get to put any governor on it. It is gone. And we've seen this in identity politics, and this is just sort of the latest extension of it, as you're describing, Wesley.
Yeah, there's no endpoint as far as I can see. And what happens when the fellow then says, well, I actually shouldn't have a left elbow? What are we going to just start hacking people up? I mean,
no, we're far too civilized for that. We could never engage in this kind of barbarism, and yet all around us, people see barbarism that they can't believe we're engaged in. So if you don't think this is real, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, anyone who says that can't happen here has been asleep for the last 50 years.
Wesley Smith, Senior Fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism. Wesley, thank you for joining us again.
Always good to talk to you. Thank you.
Well, that was fun. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Wesley Financial Group is not a law firm.
This story is called The Ugly Truth About Timeshare. If you think you've done your family a favor by buying a timeshare, you need my help. Hello, I'm Chuck McDowell, founder of Wesley Financial Group. 10 years ago, I started helping folks cancel their timeshare. In the process, started what's now called the timeshare cancellation industry. The ugly truth is when you buy a timeshare, you can't tell me how much it's going to cost or when it's going to end. I recently helped a couple that had their maintenance fees go from $800 to $3,200 a year. They also received a $4,000 assessment for a hurricane that was over 1,000 miles away. Sound crazy? The crazy thing is, this never ends. Call my office now. If we take you as a client, I guarantee we'll cancel your timeshare or you'll pay nothing.
Call for your free information kit.